The desert wind howled across the Arizona plains as Caleb Mercer guided his horse through the fading afternoon light. A former cavalry scout turned quiet rancher, Caleb preferred the silence of the frontier over the noise of towns and old wars. That evening, while checking broken fencing near the canyon trails, he noticed something strange beneath a cluster of red rocks. A small figure curled against the sand. At first he thought it was a coyote pup wrapped in cloth, but as he approached, a frightened boy looked up at him with wide dark eyes. The child couldn't have been older than 7. His moccasins were torn, his face streaked with dust, and a silver Apache necklace hung around his neck. Caleb slowly dismounted and knelt beside him. The boy spoke in broken English, whispering that he had become separated from his family during a dust storm 2 days earlier. Caleb handed him water and dried meat, then stared toward the distant mountains where Apache territory began. Most men in the territory would have avoided involvement, fearing conflict or misunderstanding, but Caleb saw only a terrified child far from home. Without hesitation, he lifted the boy onto his horse and turned toward the mountains. The journey lasted hours beneath a blazing sunset that slowly melted into crimson dusk. Along the narrow canyon paths, the boy finally revealed his name was Dakota, son of a respected Apache leader. Caleb said little during the ride, but the child slowly relaxed, pointing out familiar landmarks among the cliffs. As darkness approached, faint fires appeared ahead in the valley below. Suddenly several Apache warriors emerged from the shadows on horseback, bows drawn tight. Caleb raised both hands calmly while Dakota leaped down and ran toward them shouting in his native tongue. The tension shattered instantly. Warriors surrounded the boy, checking him carefully before turning their eyes toward Caleb. Moments later an older warrior stepped forward, his face hardened by years of battle but softened by relief. Through broken English he thanked Caleb for returning his son alive. Caleb simply nodded and turned his horse back toward home, expecting nothing more than the cold ride through the desert night. By the time he reached his ranch, the stars had risen high above the plains. He fed his horse, lit a lantern, and settled onto his porch with a cup of black coffee, believing the matter was over. Then, just as the sun disappeared completely behind the horizon, he heard distant thunder across the valley. At first he thought a storm was rolling in, but the rhythm was too steady. Hoofbeats. Dozens of them. Caleb slowly stood as riders emerged from the darkness, their silhouettes stretching across the fading light. Nearly 20 Apache warriors approached his ranch in silence. Every instinct from his old military days warned him to prepare for trouble, yet none of the men carried weapons in attack position. The riders stopped before his gate, and the same older warrior from the canyon stepped forward beside young Dakota. For a long moment nobody spoke. Then the chief dismounted and placed a weathered rifle across both hands before offering it to Caleb. It was an old cavalry rifle engraved with symbols and silver markings. The chief explained that years ago Caleb's father, also a scout, had once saved Apache families during a brutal winter instead of turning them over to soldiers. The Apache had never forgotten the debt, but they never knew the scout's son still lived nearby. Returning Dakota had honored that old kindness. The rifle, passed down through generations, was a symbol of trust rarely given to outsiders. Caleb stared at the weapon in stunned silence while the young boy smiled proudly beside his father. But the chief had not come only to give thanks. He warned Caleb that dangerous men were moving through the territory. Bandits hunting gold hidden within sacred canyon lands. Those men had already learned that Dakota survived and might come searching for anyone who helped him. Before Caleb could respond, a gunshot cracked through the night from the hills above the ranch. A lantern exploded beside the barn, showering sparks into the darkness. Instantly the Apache warriors drew weapons and scattered into defensive positions while Caleb grabbed his Winchester from beside the porch door. Shadows moved along the ridges surrounding the ranch as more shots echoed through the valley. The bandits had followed him home. What began as a simple act of kindness suddenly became a battle for survival beneath the desert moon. Caleb and the Apache warriors fought side by side across the ranch as bullets tore through fences and horses screamed in panic. The attackers expected fear and confusion, but instead they faced experienced fighters defending one another like family. Dakota hid safely inside the ranch house while Caleb and the chief held the front line near the corral. One by one the bandits were driven back into the darkness until only silence remained across the plains once more. As dawn crept over the horizon, the surviving attackers had vanished into the desert, leaving the ranch scarred but standing. Caleb leaned against the fence exhausted, watching the first sunlight touch the mountains. The chief approached quietly and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Now," he said firmly, "you are one of us." From that day forward, the lonely rancher who once lived apart from everyone became tied forever to the Apache people by loyalty, courage, and the choice to help a lost child when nobody else would.